Hey everybody, welcome to the SimHanger. My name's Mark, the SimHanger for all things flight sim related. Today we're in Just Flight's Piper Arrow III. This is not a review of this aircraft, there's plenty out there to get your teeth into. Suffice to say it's outstanding in nearly every aspect. Today we're going to be looking at different phases of flight from startup to shutdown and fly a quick circuit. And we're going to be taking off and landing at Echo Golf Mike Delta Burning Blue Designs Lydd Airport, or London Ashford as it's sometimes called. I did a review on this airport some time ago. If you'd like to know more, I'll leave links to my video in the notes below. This aircraft is distinctive in terms of its well-worn cockpit, having made its debut in Prepared, X-Plane and a number of other sims, but the Microsoft Flight Simulator version comes with two cockpit options. This well-worn one and what Just Flight have labelled as a clean cockpit, but it's not really clean. It's still worn but not quite as much. Everything remains the same except really for the yokes and the cockpit fascia. There's still signs of wear and tear but significantly less than the default cockpit. Just Flight provide instructions on how to do this in the documentation under the heading Cockpit Textures. Documentation can be found under the Aircraft folder within your Community folder. We're on the ramp, aircraft cold and dark. Let's get rid of the chocks and the tie downs first of all, and I'm also going to hide both yokes. That's done, we don't need the menu anymore, so we will just hide that. There we go. We'll take it our pre-flight inspection and walk around is complete. We'll just close and lock in the door and let's prep for startup. Parking brake is on and gear is down. Now to check our fuel, and our fuel is off, which is correct. Now across to the center panel and all the switches should be off, which it is. And a quick visual check of our circuit breakers to make sure none are popped out. All circuit breakers in. Okay, we're good to go. Alternator and battery switch on. With power on, both of our tanks should be reading. Check we've got fuel, and we can now open the fuel valve to the tank with the most fuel. In this case, they're both 50%. So either left or right's okay. Our beacon light goes on to let people know we're going to be starting up soon, and turn on my nav lights. Turn on our electric fuel pump and now push the mixture towards rich to feed in fuel, and we should see the pressure increase accordingly. That's working fine. And now our prop lever goes all the way forward. And check our alternate air lever is in the off position, which it is. If the engine had been hot, we'd have only moved the mixture lever halfway forward. We're almost ready for start now, so we'll just move the throttle forward about 1/4 to 1/2 inch. And do a visual check that the prop is clear. We'll now move the magnetos to both and then on to start, and she should fire up straight away. There we go. As soon as she starts, I want to adjust the throttle to bring the RPM down to between 14 and 1500 RPM. If I leave the throttle at idle, there's a risk that the engine will cut out. Now time to do a check on our P&Ts. Oil pressure's in the green, oil temperature is slowly increasing, altimeter is registering, and our tanks and fuel pressure seem fine. Turn on our anti-collision lights. And now time to set any avionics that we need to set. This PA28 is well equipped, it's got a transponder. We'll set that for VFR flight. And we can set up our nav frequencies and our comm frequencies as well as our GPS if we were on a flight plan. We're just going to be flying a simple left-hand circuit, so we don't need to worry too much about that sort of thing. We'll be departing runway 21. To help me maintain runway heading and also to fly the circuit, I'm going to set the course needle and the heading bug to 210 degrees. That's done, we're nearly ready to go. Just check the barometer pressure and set my altimeter as needed. Today it's 1013. It's warming up a little bit in the cockpit, so I'll just open the storm window. just to let in some fresh air, and a quick check on my vacuum gauge. This drives the altitude and directional gyros. Looking for something between 4.6 and 5, normally about 4.8. If it was cold, I'd put on my pitot heat, but it's not that cold, so I can leave that till later. Parking brake off, so let's start our taxi. Not sure whether it's Just Flight or Microsoft, but this aircraft taxis too quickly and too easily. So I've got to keep an eye on the speed and keep it slow. She does have a tendency to run away. During our taxi gives us the opportunity to test our flight controls, ailerons and rudder. That all seems okay. And it's an opportunity to check our turn and bank indicator and our annunciator panel to make sure that our fault lights are indicating. We will also check and make sure our trim is set correctly. The trim wheel is between the pilot and co-pilot seats. I find on this aircraft just a touch of nose down is required. When flying general aviation aircraft, it is normal procedure to do a run-up before departure. In effect, this is another check. And there's often some debate between pilots as to when and where is the best place to do the run-up. Had we been departing from the other end of the runway, well, we would have probably done it where we were parked. If in doubt, always ask ATC. I've chosen the end of the taxiway here, and run-ups are normally done facing into the wind. Today we have almost no wind to speak of, 1 knot. To a large degree, where you do your run-up will depend on what the airport procedures are and how much traffic is around. Handbrake on and increase throttle to 2000 RPM. We're now going to test our magnetos. First of all, the left. We can see a small drop in RPM. And now right. Again, a drop. It's less than 175 RPM, so that's alright. Back to both. Now to exercise the prop lever. Pulling it all the way back, we'll see a fairly significant drop in RPM. And that's what's happening, all good. Excellent. Now with our parking brake on and also foot brakes on, let's test the throttle. Only hold it at max RPM for a very short period of time. Otherwise the engine could overheat and be damaged. Our landing lights can now come on and our pitot heat must be put on here as well. Transponder goes to Alt, and a quick check to make sure that our fuel pressure is maintained, whether or not the booster pump is off or not. Main fuel pump is mechanical, driven by the engine, and the booster pump is electrical. Pressures remain static, that's all good. And now for our final checks. First of all, we check the vacuum and our pressure and temperatures. They're all looking good. All my lights are on, that's fine. Another cross check on alternate air, that's off. Exhaust gas temperatures looking okay. Fuel pressure is fine with and without the booster pump. Flaps 1 notch down for takeoff. We've been cleared for takeoff by ATC, so handbrake coming off, and let's taxi on to the runway. Last minute visual scan, make sure everything's okay. A quick cross check on the trims. Mine are set with just a touch of nose down. It's a little bit noisy, so let's close the storm window. All done, we're ready to go. Handbrake off, and we'll slowly advance the throttle about 1/3 of the way along just to get the aircraft moving. I've got plenty of runway at Lydd, but now slowly advancing to full throttle. Steering with my rudder as she is pulling slightly as one would expect with the torque from the propeller. Looking for 65 to 70 knots and then pull back on the yoke and gently up she goes. My rate of climb is dependent on my airspeed. I want to maintain between 80 and 90 knots. Drifting slightly, changing to align with the runway. End of runway coming up, so time to get that gear up. Gear is up and maintaining my climb, and at just over 400 feet, flaps up as well. Now executing quite a sharp left-hand turn following the traffic pattern. There's an airspace restriction in place due to a power station in the vicinity. Still full throttle, but I've pulled back slightly on the prop lever. There's no need to have it redlining on the climb. Let's get some lights in the cockpit. We won't be climbing very high today. We're going to go to 2,000 feet. Flying circuits at Lydd will be typically about 1,500 feet. We're coming up on the shoreline, and that's my indication that I need to turn downwind. Just passing 1,500 feet. Scanning my instruments to make sure everything looks okay and everything's in the green. I'm also using the course and heading indicator as a quick reference and visual guide to remaining on track. I'm now approaching my desired altitude, 2,000 feet. So pulling back on the throttle and just taking off a little bit of the power and setting myself up for cruise. Pulling the prop lever back, I'm going to be looking for something between 2,200 and 2,300 for the prop. For the throttle, I use the manifold pressure as a guide and looking for something around 24-25. I'm still climbing, so I have to adjust my trim. The aircraft will naturally nose up with greater speed. Landing lights and fuel pumps can go off. It's now time to turn onto our base leg, and at the same time we need to start the descent. It's a relatively short base leg and I want to be at 1,500 feet before turning on to align with the runway and final. Using a combination of power and trim to control my descent. Something between 400 and 700 feet per minute will be fine. As we level out from our turn, the aircraft will naturally go nose up. So again, a little bit of trim just helps keep that descent on track. (1,700 feet), and now turning on to final. Landing lights and fuel pumps now going on as we prep to align on final. Now on final, I have the runway visual and altitude is just touching 1,500 feet. (105 knots), so gear down. If your base turn had brought you closer to the airport, then you would have put your gear down on your base leg, and perhaps even first stage of flaps. Landing gear 3 green. Flaps now 1 notch down. Prop lever now push forward, so I've got maximum power if I need it. 90 knots and second stage of flaps coming in. A little bit of trim, but mainly using my power to control my descent. I am a little high. Altitude 800 feet. Scanning instruments to make sure we're all okay for the landing. Speed 80 knots and last stage of flaps coming in now. Puppy lights 2 white, 2 red. Past the missed approach point, so committed to the landing and coming in. Want to come over the threshold with between 70 and 75 knots. Throttle being pulled back to idle, and now the flare, just hold it above the horizon and we're down. A little bumpy, but it's a safe landing. Flaps retracted and now fully up. And now looking for the off-ramp. Once safely off the runway, landing lights and fuel booster pump off. Now let's go and find a parking. And now for the shutdown. Handbrake on. Pitot heat can now come off. Another mixture lever to fuel cut off, and that will stop the engine. And now prop lever all the way down. Now that our prop is off, we can turn off our anti-collision lights and our beacon lights. We don't need the instrument panel lights anymore, they can go off, as can the nav lights. And we can now turn our magnetos to off. Fuel valve now to off or closed. Now to shut down some of the avionics that we had on. We should have perhaps done this before we shut down the engine, but no matter. Our nav1 and COM, our DME, as well as our transponder can now go off. And finally the alternator and battery master switch. Well, that's my take on flying the Piper Arrow III. Might not be absolutely real world, but it's close enough. Trust you found this useful and informative. I must say I'm impressed with the handling and characteristics of the Piper Arrow III from Just Flight. Very realistic, and I have flown one before, albeit many years ago. What are your views on this aircraft? Let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you very much for joining me. Appreciate the support, and if you enjoyed it, consider giving me a thumbs up. It helps the channel. Stay well, look after yourselves. See you soon, and bye for now.